Every great fantasy story rests on a single hidden agreement. It is a contract between the writer and the reader. That contract can be summed up in 3 words: wonder with rules. Today we will unpack what that means and how you can use it in your own writing. Let's start by defining the genre itself. Fantasy is a spectrum, not a single point. At one end sits high or epic fantasy. This is a fully realized secondary world with elevated stakes and sweeping scope. From there we move to sword and sorcery. This is individual scaled adventure, where personal stakes matter more than the fate of civilizations. At the other end sits urban fantasy. Here, the fantastic is embedded inside a recognizable contemporary world. Along this same spectrum, you will also find portal fantasy, where a protagonist crosses from our world into another. And you will find fairy tale retellings, which work within or against a story shape the reader already half knows. But here is the crucial insight. What holds this entire spectrum together is not the presence of magic. It is that the impossible has to be governed by rules sturdy enough for a reader to trust. So what does the fantasy reader actually want? Underneath the contract is wonder that has rules. Readers want full immersion in an impossible world whose internal logic feels earned rather than arbitrary. They want the impossible to behave like a real system. That means a system with edges, with costs, and with consequences. It should never be a convenience that bends whenever the plot needs it to. This is why fantasy tolerates extensive world building that other genres would call indulgent. And it is why a magic system that quietly changes its own rules partway through breaks trust faster than almost anything else. Now let's look at the hallmarks that define this genre. First, the internally consistent impossible. These are magic or world elements governed by rules the reader can learn, predict, and trust. Second, the larger world glimpsed. This is the sense that the setting continues past the edges of the plot, with history and geography and culture implied rather than fully toured. Third, the found order in chaos. Think of prophecy, a magic system, or destiny that gives events shape without removing genuine risk. Fourth, the threshold crossed. This is movement from an ordinary or limited existence into an expanded understanding of what is possible. It is mirrored in both the plot and the character's inner life. Fifth, the cost that matters. Power, magic, or victory must extract a price the story actually respects, not one it waives when convenient. Consider Brandon Sanderson's magic systems as a model here. They work because the rules are established before they are needed dramatically. So when a character solves a problem, the solution feels earned rather than invented on the spot. Now, let's map out the essential subgenres, because each one promises a different kind of book. High or epic fantasy offers a secondary world, elevated stakes, and often multiple points of view. Sword and sorcery offers individual scaled adventure with brisker pacing. Urban fantasy embeds the fantastic inside a recognizable modern world, often with its own hidden rules of concealment. Portal fantasy sends a protagonist from our world into another, carrying an outsider's perspective as a structural asset. Fairy tale retelling works within or against a story shaped the reader already knows. Cozy or feel-good fantasy promises low stakes, found family, and comfort above all. Fantasy romance carries romance's central promise, the success of the relationship inside fantasy's stakes. And dark fantasy sits further along this spectrum with its own distinct reader contract. Knowing your subgenre tells you what to promise, so signal it early. These subgenres tend to travel along familiar plot shapes. There is the quest, a journey toward a goal with escalating obstacles. There is the chosen one's burden, where destiny is thrust upon a reluctant protagonist. There is the war building, where factions move toward conflict and the protagonist is caught in the widening gap. There is the world discovered, where protagonist and reader learn the true rules of the world together. And there is the restoration, where a broken order must be repaired, and the cost of repair is as real as the cost of the breaking. Character arcs reinforce these same patterns. The untested proven shows a latent capability proven under real pressure. The power earned shows a character growing into an ability they were not ready for. The belonging found shows an outsider finding their place within the world's rules. The Legacy Reckoned shows a protagonist coming to terms with inherited responsibility. Notice how each arc turns on the world's rules and the cost of power. That is the contract working at the character level. Fantasy also blends easily with other genres. It pairs naturally with historical fiction, with romance, with coming of age, and with mystery. The boundary with soft science fiction blurs easily in both directions. But fantasy also fights with certain genres. Hard science fiction's commitment to plausibility runs against fantasy's freedom of invention. Literary fiction's resistance to plot machinery can sit uneasily against epic fantasy's reliance on quest and destiny. If you write a hybrid, you must decide which engine is actually driving the book. So, how do you start the story right? Establish that rules exist early. The reader doesn't need the whole system explained, only the confidence that one is there and will be honored. Ground the reader in a personal stake first, before the world's larger stakes arrive. Show wonder through specific detail. One vivid, concrete, impossible thing does more work than a catalog of them. Signal your subgenre and scope early, so the opening commits to a promise. And introduce the ordinary state your protagonist begins in, so the threshold crossed later truly registers as a crossing. Watch out for the most common pitfall. That pitfall is world-building delivered as a lecture, explaining the magic, history, or politics before the reader has any reason to care. Reveal it through lived experience and plot necessity instead. Here is an exercise to test your own work. Take your world's central impossible element, then answer 3 questions in 1 sentence each. What is the rule that governs it? What does it cost the person who uses it, specifically? And what would break if that rule were violated? And does your plot ever actually test that? If you can answer those clearly, you understand the core contract. Wonder without rules is chaos. Rules without wonder are just mechanics. The magic of fantasy lives precisely where the two meet. Build that balance with intention, and your readers will trust you all the way to the final page.